The morning started like any other day on Deimos Station. Through the reinforced glass dome, Mars hung like a giant red jewel in the black sky. 24 children from the station's only school pressed their faces against the observation windows, pointing excitedly at the mining robots moving across the moon's surface. "Remember to stay with your buddy," Mrs. Brown called out, her voice carrying the patience of someone who had led many field trips before. She watched as Tom held his sister Lisa's hand, always the protective older brother. The Deimos Mining Museum wasn't large, but it held fascinating pieces of equipment from the early days of Mars colonization. The children moved from exhibit to exhibit, their voices echoing off the metal walls. Tom, at 14, pretended to be too old for such trips, but his eyes lit up at the ancient drilling machines. "Tom, look." 10-year-old Lisa tugged at his sleeve, pointing at a holographic display of the first mining operation. "That's where Mom works now." The first warning came without any fanfare, a simple red light, blinking in the corner of the room. Mrs. Brown's face went pale as she checked her wrist computer. The children, trained through monthly drills, began moving toward the emergency exits. But this wasn't a drill. The museum's doors sealed shut with a heavy thud. Through the dome, they watched 3 ships descend from the stars. They weren't the usual supply ships or passenger vessels. These were darker, their hulls bearing the scarred marks of countless battles. "Pirates," Tom whispered, pulling Lisa closer. The Gray Fleet's reputation preceded them. They were outcasts, raiders who struck at the edges of human space. But they had never attacked a civilian station before, especially not one with children. The pirates breached the dome using focused ion beams, their precision suggesting this wasn't their first raid. The museum's air stayed intact thanks to emergency shields, but the children huddled together as 6 tall figures entered through the breach. Their armor was a patchwork of different species technology, and their weapons looked too large for human hands. "What a lucky day," the leader said, his voice distorted through his helmet speaker. "I am Captain Stone, and you are now my guests." Mrs. Brown stepped forward, spreading her arms to shield her students. "These are children. Take what you want and leave them." Captain Stone laughed, the sound making Lisa grip her brother's hand tighter. "Oh, we will take what we want, and what we want are these lovely bargaining chips." He gestured at the children. "Humans will pay anything to get their young back." One of the pirates, shorter than the others, stepped forward. "Captain, the protocols." "Silence." Officer Black. Stone snapped. "Load them onto the ship, all of them." Tom's mind raced. The monthly drills had prepared them for fires, air leaks, even meteor strikes. But nothing had prepared them for this. He looked at the scared faces around him, at Mrs. Brown's defiant stance, at his sister's trembling hand in his. "Listen carefully," he whispered to Lisa as the pirates began herding them toward their ship. "Remember Mom's lessons about the mining ships, about their systems." Lisa nodded, her eyes wide but alert. Even at 10, she had inherited their mother's sharp mind for mechanical systems. The walk to the pirate ship was short but terrifying. The children moved in a tight group, their training kicking in even now. Stay together. Keep calm. Help each other. Mrs. Brown counted heads repeatedly, her voice steady as she encouraged them. Captain Stone watched from the front, clearly pleased with his prize. He didn't notice Tom memorizing every turn they took, or Lisa studying the ship's door mechanisms with keen eyes. As the last child stepped onto the ship, alarms finally began blaring across Deimos Station. Too late. The pirate's ship detached smoothly, its engines glowing blue against the black of space. "Send the ransom message," Stone commanded. "Let's show humanity how much their children are worth." Officer Black looked at the huddled children, then at his captain. A cold feeling settled in his stomach. Something told him they had just made a terrible mistake. In the cargo hold turned prison, Tom gathered the younger children close. "We're going to be okay," he said, sounding more confident than he felt. "Help is coming. But until then, we need to be smart. We need to be brave." Lisa squeezed his hand 3 times, their secret signal for, "I trust you." They didn't know it yet, but across the solar system, alarms were already ringing. Humanity was about to show the galaxy exactly what happened when someone took their children. The news reached Earth within minutes. In the Global Defense Command Center in Geneva, Admiral James stood motionless as he watched the footage from Deimos Station. Around him, the command center erupted into activity, but he heard nothing except the final words from the distress call. They took the children. 3 simple words. They changed everything. In the Galactic Council chamber on Europa, alien representatives watched in confusion as human military channels suddenly lit up with more activity than they had ever seen. Ships that had been on standard patrol began changing course. Military reserves received activation calls. Even civilian vessels started reporting in for potential support roles. Ambassador Ray, a tall blue-skinned alien who had studied humans for 20 years, stood before the council. "You don't understand," he said, his translator struggling to convey the urgency in his voice. "This is beyond a military response. This is something else entirely." The council leader, an ancient being of pure energy, flickered with confusion. "The pirates have taken hostages before. Standard procedures exist for such situations." "No." Ray's hand shook as he pulled up historical footage. "Look at Earth's history. Look what happens when human children are threatened." On the main screen, images flashed. Parents lifting cars to save trapped children. Teachers shielding students from danger. Strangers rushing into burning buildings to save unknown children. The council chamber grew quiet. Back on Earth, Admiral James finally moved. His voice was calm, too calm. "Send the message to all ships. Priority Black. Authorization code. Children of Earth." The alien observers in the command center looked at each other in shock. Priority Black had never been used before. They watched as every human military vessel in the solar system acknowledged the code and began changing course. In the pirates' last known sector, 3 alien trading ships received the warning message. Their captains, who had occasionally bought goods from the Gray Fleet, made an immediate decision. They broadcast the locations of every pirate hideout they knew. "Why?" their crews asked. One captain, his scales rippling with fear, replied, "Because if we don't help find those children, the humans won't stop until they've searched every corner of space, and they won't care what they break in the process." On Mars, Lisa and Tom's mother sat in the mining control room, her fingers flying over the controls. Every mining sensor, every probe, every scanner was reprogrammed to search for the pirate ship's engine signature. Around her, other parents did the same with their equipment. No one had ordered them to. No one had to. In the Galactic Council chamber, more alien representatives began standing up. The Arthan, silicon-based beings who rarely involved themselves in organic matters, offered their entire sensor network. The merfolk of Europa's oceans provided their deep space tracking systems. Even the mysterious cloud dwellers of Venus broke their usual silence to offer help. Ambassador Ray watched with a mix of pride and fear. "You see now, humans have many unspoken rules. Taking their children breaks the biggest one." On the command deck of the flagship Terra, Admiral James received updates from across the solar system. Alien ships were joining the search. Criminal informants were providing information. Hidden sensors were being revealed and offered for use. "Sir," his second-in-command said, "I've never seen anything like this. Every species is helping." James looked at the picture on his desk, his own children smiling back at him. "Because they're learning what we've always known. There are lines you don't cross. Taking children is the worst one." The Admiral stood, his voice carrying across the deck. "Send word to every ship, every station, every probe. Find that pirate vessel." He paused, his next words carrying the weight of a parent's promise. "And let Captain Stone learn why every spacefaring race has one universal warning in their first contact protocols. Never, ever harm human children." Across the solar system, ships began moving with singular purpose. The hunt had begun. The pirate ship Gray Shadow floated in the darkness of an asteroid belt, its engines cold to avoid detection. Captain Stone watched the incoming messages with growing unease. Every smuggler's port, every hidden base, every secret refueling station had sent the same response: stay away. In his private quarters, he pulled up the latest news feeds. His blood ran cold. Species that had fought each other for centuries were now working together. Trade rivals were sharing scanner data. Even the mysterious void walkers, who never involved themselves in lesser beings' quarrels, had offered their help to the humans. Officer Black entered the room without knocking. "Captain, we need to talk." "About what?" Stone snapped, his confidence cracking. "About them." Black pointed to the security feed showing their prisoners. The children sat in tight groups, their eyes alert, their movements purposeful. They're not acting like normal hostages. In the makeshift holding area, Tom watched the pirates through half-closed eyes. He counted their patrol patterns, noted their shift changes. Lisa sat beside him, quietly humming as she drew what looked like innocent doodles, but were actually maps of the ship's layouts. Meanwhile, in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, an emergency session was underway. The council leaders' energy form pulsed with concern as they watched recordings from Earth's history. Ambassador Ray stood before them, his blue skin pale with emotion. "Observe," he said, playing a video of a small human female lifting a ground vehicle to save her young. Their protective instinct defies their physical limitations. Their normal social divisions disappear. Even their laws change when children are at risk. The chamber erupted in discussion. A tall crystalline being rose to speak. "3 cycles ago, humans nearly declared war on my species because we accidentally frightened their young during first contact. We thought they were overreacting. Now I understand." Another alien, a swarm intelligence representing thousands of tiny floating orbs, formed into a speaking pattern. "Our research shows humans have 3 critical triggers: harm to their pets, destruction of their planet, and threats to their children. The pirates have activated the most dangerous one. In deep space, the human fleet moved with terrible purpose. Admiral James received hourly updates from alien allies. Star maps filled with new information as species revealed hidden knowledge of pirate movements. Ships that had previously avoided human space now offered their fastest routes and secret jump points. On a distant trading station, a grizzled alien merchant pulled a young pirate aside. The merchant's tentacles trembled as he spoke. "I was there, 30 years ago, when someone took human children from a colony world. Do you know what happened?" The young pirate shook his head. "The humans didn't just pursue the kidnappers. They dismantled entire criminal networks. They found every person who had helped hide the criminals. The ones who survived wished they hadn't." The merchant's outer eyes closed in memory. "Tell your captain. Return the children. It's the only way." Back on the pirate ship, Captain Stone paced in his quarters. The ransom messages he had sent went unanswered. Instead, he received a single reply from Earth: "Return them unarmed. You have 1 chance." Officer Black watched the security feeds with growing horror. The children had organized themselves into shifts. Some slept while others watched. They shared food efficiently, cared for the youngest ones, and maintained a calm that seemed terrifyingly unnatural for hostages. "They're not scared," Black whispered to himself. "They're waiting." In the holding area, Lisa finished her latest drawing and passed it to Tom. Hidden in the childish scribbles were the locations of every power conduit they'd seen, every security panel they'd passed, every weakness they'd spotted in the ship's design. Tom smiled at his sister, then looked at the stars through a small porthole. Somewhere out there, humanity was coming, and they were ready. The pirates had made 3 big mistakes. First, they assumed children would be easy hostages. Second, they forgot that modern space colonies trained their young for survival from an early age. And third, they didn't notice that the kids they captured were from a mining colony, where understanding ship systems was as natural as breathing. Tom sat with the younger children in their holding area, teaching them a clapping game. To the guards watching the security feeds, it looked like prisoners trying to pass the time. In reality, each clap pattern was a code, teaching the little ones which panels in the ship could be opened in an emergency. Lisa walked the permitted areas during exercise time, her small hand trailing against the walls. The guards thought she was steadying herself in the artificial gravity. Instead, she was counting steps, mapping routes, and finding every maintenance tunnel that could fit a child's body. In the ship's security room, Officer Black reviewed the footage again. Something wasn't right. The children were too organized, too calm. He watched as Mrs. Brown led them in what looked like simple exercise routines, but his military training recognized the movements. They were practicing emergency procedures. Why do they keep doing that? Another guard asked, pointing at a group of children huddled in a corner. Black zoomed in the camera. They were playing with the food dispensers, apparently frustrated that they couldn't get them to work properly. But his eyes narrowed as he noticed something. Every failed attempt taught them more about the ship's systems. Deep in the holding area, Tom gathered the oldest children for a quiet meeting. "Remember the Mars colony crisis training," he whispered. "Rule 1. Stay calm," they replied in unison. "Rule 2. Learn everything. Rule 3. Be ready." Mrs. Brown watched from nearby, pretending to read. She had taught colony safety for 15 years. Every child on Deimos knew the basics: how ships worked, how life support functioned, how to survive in space. It wasn't just education, it was survival. In his quarters, Captain Stone reviewed the day's reports. Nothing seemed wrong. The children ate their meals, played their games, and caused no trouble. Perfect hostages. Yet something about their behavior made his scales itch. He pulled up the footage from their first day aboard, then the second, then the third. Slowly, his eyes widened. The children weren't just adapting to captivity. They were learning his ship. "Black," he called over the intercom. "Get in here." But in the holding area, the children had already started the next phase of their plan. Lissa sat near a ventilation grate, singing a song about space miners. Each verse contained coded information about the ship's layout that she'd mapped. The younger children sang along, memorizing every word. Tom organized games of tag that always ended near crucial system junctions. Every child learned which panels could be opened, which buttons could be pressed, which wires could be pulled in an emergency. Mrs. Brown taught them breathing exercises that were actually preparation for possible pressure loss. She told stories about brave space explorers that were really lessons in crisis response. Officer Black arrived at the captain's quarters, his face grave. "Sir, I've been analyzing their behavior. These aren't normal children." "Explain," Stone demanded. "They're from Deimos colony. Their parents are miners, engineers, survival specialists. These kids probably knew more about ship systems before they got here than half our crew." In the holding area, Lisa finished another drawing. Hidden in the childish pictures were instructions for disabling security systems, mapped from her careful observation during exercise times. "Tom," she whispered, passing him the drawing. "I found their backup life support controls." Her brother nodded, adding the information to their mental map. The children of Deimos weren't just waiting for rescue anymore. They were preparing to help it arrive. The human fleet moved through space like a storm. Ships from 30 different alien species flew alongside them, their combined sensors sweeping every asteroid field, checking every shadow. Admiral James stood on the bridge of the flagship Terra, watching as another section of space lit up with scan results. "Sir," his sensor officer called out, excitement in her voice. "The Void Walkers found something." Energy traces matching the gray shadow's engines. In the pirate ship's hiding spot, deep within an abandoned mining belt, Captain Stone felt the first real stirrings of fear. Their best hiding spots had been exposed. Their secret routes were blocked. Every safe harbor had turned them away. "How are they finding us so fast?" he demanded, slamming his fist on the command console. Officer Black stood quietly in the corner, watching the security feeds. "Sir, the shield codes. They're acting strange." On the security screens, Lisa sat cross-legged near a maintenance panel, singing what seemed like a children's song about spaceships, but her small fingers tapped against the floor in a pattern that matched the shield harmonics perfectly. Tom led the younger children in a game of Follow the Leader that just happened to take them past every major system junction in their allowed area. Each child memorized the locations, adding to their mental map of the ship's weaknesses. In the fleet's command center, Admiral James received a strange message. It contained what looked like random numbers, hidden in the background static of the pirate ship's energy emissions. "Those patterns," a young officer said, leaning forward, "they match colony emergency codes. The children are signaling us." The Admiral smiled for the first time in days. "Deimos colony kids, they're not just waiting for rescue. They're helping us find them." Across the sector, alien ships reported similar findings. The Voidwalkers detected shield frequencies being subtly altered. The crystalline beings picked up repeating patterns in the ship's waste heat that matched human distress signals. Even the swarm intelligence noticed changes in the pirate ship's electronic emissions that couldn't be natural. "The young ones are clever," Ambassador Ray told the Galactic Council, his blue skin glowing with admiration. "They're turning the ship itself into a beacon." In the gray shadows holding area, Mrs. Brown watched as her students continued their quiet resistance. Every game taught them something new. Every song shared vital information. Every drawing mapped another escape route. Captain Stone's paranoia grew by the hour. The ship's systems showed random glitches. Security cameras would flicker. Door controls would lag for just a second. "It's the children," Officer Black finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "They've learned our systems. They're changing things, bit by bit." "Impossible," Stone roared. "They're just kids." "No," Black corrected, watching Lisa draw another innocent picture that he now realized was a detailed map of the ship's power grid. "They're colony kids. They grew up learning this stuff, and we've given them 5 days to study our ship." In the fleet's lead ship, Admiral James received news that made his heart soar. The combined alien sensor net had found a pattern. All the strange signals, all the system glitches, all the hidden codes pointed to one sector. "All ships, move to these coordinates," he ordered. "Maximum speed." The human fleet surged forward, alien allies moving with them in perfect formation. Years of distrust and competition had been forgotten in this shared mission. In the holding area, Tom felt the slight change in the ship's vibrations. The pirates were running again. He squeezed Lisa's hand 3 times, their signal for hope. She squeezed back 4 times, their signal for ready. The children of Deimos had done their part. They had turned their prison into a signal fire. Now they prepared for the next phase, helping their rescuers when they arrived. Captain Stone stood on his bridge, watching as emergency alerts flashed across every screen. Their last hiding place had been found. The ship's systems were acting stranger by the hour, and now his own crew was starting to whisper about surrendering. "Sir," Officer Black reported, his voice shaking, "we've lost contact with engineering. The systems down there they're not responding correctly." In engineering, 2 young pirates stared at their control panels in confusion. Every time they fixed one system, another would start showing errors. Behind them, unknown to all, a small panel lay slightly open. Hours earlier, Lisa had spent 5 minutes near it during exercise time, her small fingers moving wires in ways the pirates never thought to check. The humans were coming. Everyone knew it now. In the holding area, Tom gathered the children for what looked like story time. Mrs. Brown sat with them, apparently reading from an old book about space explorers. But her words carried hidden meanings. "And remember," she read, her voice steady, "when the explorers needed help, they turned off all the lights to signal their friends." 24 children nodded, understanding perfectly. On the bridge, Stone received another warning. The human fleet had been spotted, moving faster than any fleet this size should be able to move. Behind them came ships of every alien species known to space. "How?" Stone whispered, watching the tactical display. "How did they find us so quickly?" Officer Black looked at the security feeds showing their young prisoners. He saw Tom leading another game of Follow the Leader, passing by crucial system junctions. He watched Lisa drawing more of her detailed pictures. He observed Mrs. Brown teaching more survival stories. "Sir," Black said quietly, "we need to surrender." "Never." Stone slammed his fist down. "We still have the children. They won't dare attack us directly." At that moment, every screen on the bridge flickered. The ship's lights dimmed for just a second. In engineering, more systems started showing mysterious errors. In the holding area, Tom gave the signal. It was time. Every child knew their part. Lisa started singing, her voice carrying through the corridors. Other children joined in, their song echoing through the ship's halls. The pirates thought it was just another way to pass time. They didn't realize the vibrations from their voices were matching the ship's shield harmonics, creating tiny fluctuations in the defense systems. "Warning," the ship's computer announced. "Shield stability at 89%, 85%, 80%. Stone's face went pale. "What's happening?" On the tactical display, the human fleet split into perfect attack formation. Admiral James stood on his bridge, watching as all the pieces fell into place. The children's hidden signals had given them everything they needed. Shield frequencies, system weaknesses, crew positions. "Sir," his tactical officer reported, "the pirate ship's shields are weakening. They're following the exact pattern we were told to expect." James nodded. The children of Deimos had done their part. Now it was time for the fleet to do theirs. In the gray shadows corridors, Officer Black made his decision. He opened a secured channel to the human fleet, broadcasting on an old emergency frequency that Lisa had been tapping out for days. "This is Officer Black," he transmitted. "I want to help get the children out." Captain Stone's voice roared over the ship's speakers. "All hands, prepare for battle. We'll show them why the Gray Fleet is feared." But in the holding area, Tom and Lisa shared a knowing look. The children pulled out the emergency breath masks they'd discovered days ago, hidden in the maintenance panels they'd mapped. Mrs. Brown smiled proudly at her students. They had survived. They had resisted. They had signaled. And now, they were ready for what came next. The end came faster than anyone expected. Not with a great battle, but with the quiet precision of a surgeon's knife. The human fleet appeared from multiple directions at once, their formation perfect. Behind them, alien ships formed a second barrier. Their sensors focused on the gray shadows' weakened shields. The places where the children's activities had created gaps in the defense systems glowed clearly on their scanners. Captain Stone stood on his bridge, watching as his worst nightmare unfolded. "Shields to maximum. Prepare all weapons." But nothing responded. In engineering, every system showed critical errors. Lisa's careful rewiring over the past days had finally paid off. The ship's computer flashed warning after warning, its security protocols confused by the changes the children had made. "Sir," Officer Black's voice came over the comm. "The children are secured. I've moved them to the emergency pods with Mrs. Brown. Just let them go." In the emergency pod bay, Tom helped the younger children buckle in, just like they had practiced in their colony drills. Lisa sat at the pod's simple control panel, her small fingers ready on the launch controls she had studied for days. Mrs. Brown looked at her students with fierce pride. Not one had broken. Not one had given up. They had turned their prison into their weapon, and they had done it without the pirates even noticing. On the flagship Terra, Admiral James received the transmission from Officer Black. The tactical display showed exactly what the children's signals had promised: weakened shields, confused systems, and clear paths to the emergency pods. "All ships, hold position," James ordered. "Special Forces teams, you have go." The rescue happened in 3 perfect moves, just as the children had helped plan through their hidden messages. First, the shield grid finally failed completely, the result of days of careful interference by the children's activities. The pirates never realized that every song, every game, every seemingly random action had been timed to create this exact moment. Second, Special Forces teams entered through the exact points Lisa had mapped in her drawings. They moved through the corridors Tom had memorized in his games of Follow the Leader. Every security camera they passed had already been adjusted by tiny hands to show loops of empty hallways. Third, Officer Black kept Captain Stone distracted on the bridge while the rescue teams worked. "Sir, nothing's responding," he shouted, making sure to keep the captain's attention. "All systems are in chaos." The entire operation took less than 15 minutes. When Captain Stone finally realized what was happening, it was already over. The children were safely aboard the rescue ships, each one still calm, still organized, still showing the strength that had kept them alive and fighting. "Impossible," Stone whispered, watching as his great plan crumbled. "They were just children." "No," Officer Black said, as human soldiers secured the bridge. "They were colony children, and you never stood a chance." In the fleet's medical bay, parents reunited with their children. Lisa ran into her mother's arms while Tom stood nearby, still watching over the younger ones until their own parents arrived. Mrs. Brown made sure every child was accounted for, maintaining her teacher's vigilance until the very end. A week later, the Galactic Council met in emergency session. Ambassador Ray stood before them, his blue skin glowing with emotion. "Let this be recorded in every species' laws," he announced. "The taking of children as hostages is now forbidden across all space, with special emphasis on human children. Not for their sake, but for yours." The council voted unanimously in favor. In the years that followed, the story of the Deimos children became legend. How they turned their captivity into resistance. How they transformed their prison into a signal beacon. How they proved that humanity's strength wasn't just in its weapons or its anger, but in the incredible spirit it passed on to its children. On Deimos Station, a new plaque was placed in the mining museum. It didn't list any battles or show any weapons. It simply read, "To the children who proved that knowledge, courage, and hope are the greatest powers in the universe." Tom and Lisa sometimes visited that plaque, remembering those days. They had taught the galaxy an important lesson. Never underestimate human children, especially not the children of the stars.